So how old is Abigail today?
Abigail's going to turn 12 today. So,
Wow, that's crazy.
yeah.
Cassie told me recently that she falls asleep listening to the same podcast over and over. That's like me, you,
And Brandon. Yeah.
which is funny. So her dad and uncle and pastor. So I was teasing her on Sunday a little bit about it, and she just like bluntly, and again, as I say that, she wasn't being disrespectful or anything, but she just was like, "Your voice just puts me to sleep."
You're like, thanks.
I was like, you know what? I'm not offended by that. That like you find it comforting, like I'm monotone or whatever. But one of my favorite Abigail stories is so we were in Connect groups. That's actually how we really became close friends.
Yep.
Was in Connect groups years ago. And Abigail was just a little girl, and at our house in our front room, when you come in the front doors, our steps go up, and so they're all exposed. And all of a sudden, like we're in a group and we're doing something. I just look over, and Abigail has climbed. Like she's so little, she shouldn't have gone upstairs by herself, but she has climbed the outside of the steps.
Like
she's
a
at the very
handrail.
top. Yeah, the banner, and she's at the very top. And I was like, I didn't want to do the like whole like scream or something and her get scared. So I just was like real calm. Hey, Chris, Cassie, just FYI. And I was getting up and walking over there. I'm like, Abigail's on the outside of the steps.
Slowly start moving in that direction.
Yeah, but that was just kind of how she was.
She was, we called her the smallest walking person ever.
Yeah,
And because she was super tiny, but she was adventurous. She would jump off. We had a game where she would jump off the edge of the couch, and I would catch her, and she like it similar to a story that your brother shared at times, and she would just do that. And then, but it's funny to see how she's kind of transitioned. She's not scared of much, but she's also not quite as adventurous as she used to be. So, but
well, you know why? Because life will teach you. Like, jumping off couches hurts. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
sure.
so the story you just alluded to, my brother Chris, when his daughter, she's now 21, when she was just a little girl, she was the same way. She was so tiny, but she walked real early on. Like she was walking at like 9 months, like legitimately. But she did a game where she would climb something and then count down, go 3, 2, 1, and just jump. So I didn't know that this was a game. So Chris and I are sitting on a couch facing this way. Behind us is his kitchen, and there's a table over here. She climbed up on a chair of the table. We're facing forward, and she just goes 3, 2. Chris, just in the middle of us watching a game, just hops up, hurdles the couch, and catches her. He knew what was going on.
About to go down.
And I was like, "What is going on?" Turned around, and she was giggling and belly laughing. He was like, She's psycho.
Talk
He's
about
she'll
a
just
game
jump.
to keep you on your toes at all times, right? Like you're just like always aware of what's going on. And the moment you hear a countdown, you take off running.
And can you imagine the moment you fail? Like your kid just looks at you totally disillusioned at that point.
Where were you at that one?
Kids are so trusting too, right? Like it's like
Where were
you
you at
just
that one?
assume you're going to be there.
Yeah.
Man.
Well, awesome. Well, everyone, thank you for joining us for the Branch Podcast. What we do each week is we just take a moment and sit down, and sometimes, more often than not, we reflect on the past Sunday's teaching. Other times, we'll just cover different topics that we feel led to do. But this week, what we're going to be talking about is this past Sunday's message, which was week 4 in our series, looking at how we can make better choices in our lives. This past week, we focused on the idea of looking forward, the idea of pausing and looking at the choices that we're making and trying to figure out how it's going to impact us long term. I think that's, if I'm being honest, I think that one is oftentimes the most difficult because, there's a lot of decisions where the immediate results are really obvious. It is when you have to try to, thoughtfully process through how is this going to impact me long term. Can we agree that we have an incredible ability to deceive ourselves, even when we think
100%.
long term? Why do you think that is? I guess that's where I want to begin today is why do you think it is? I've said it every week that I've taught is I think people inherently want to make choices to better their lives, and yet we make choices that destroy our lives at times. And we had all the information. We just didn't process it, and it's because we deceived ourselves. Why is that? Why do you think that happens?
If you look at it in light of like, and the most prime example I can think of is like when it comes to food. Like I can eat a donut today, and it really doesn't have a large impact on the end goal. If I make that a habit, I eat a donut every single day, you now start to see a trend which starts to contribute to take you down a path that will lead you to will lead you to obesity, overweight, like all that. So I think there is a level of we sometimes don't feel the immediacy of our consequences. And even though we know it's going to get there, we know this time is not the time that we get to that destination of destruction. And so we we keep saying, I can eat a donut today until we're 40 pounds overweight in a bad place. You know what I mean? So I think we have that going for us that really hinders our ability to go, I see the end. That's not going to be where I want to be. And so I'm not going to make this decision today.
In some ways, it's like the proverbial frog in the boiling water.
Yeah.
That because if you think about it, if the total destruction is 100%, if you're only experiencing 1% every day, it doesn't seem like 100% until one day you realize I'm there. I'm in that bad place.
Yeah, I mean, I think of the example just like eating a donut every day or smoking a cigarette. I'm convinced most people who smoke cigarettes, if you were to tell them, hey, tomorrow, if you keep smoking cigarettes today, you're going to get lung cancer. How many people are going to stop smoking immediately? The idea is this delayed response of today's not the day. Like there's a risk involved here, but we somehow convince ourselves that it doesn't apply to us, which I think you either mentioned this message or last message, this idea that we are the exception, right? We're the exception to the rule. The other part of it, I think, is delayed gratification. And we've talked about this, so not to beat that drum again and again, but we are so used to having everything that we want. I mean, there has never been a culture like ours in the sense that we have access to so much and so quickly that we have trained ourselves to operate that way. And so I think part of the problem is so you brought it up last time, like the discipline of fasting is all but forgotten in the American church for most people, right? And I would say it's actually one of the things we need to bring back because it teaches us delayed gratification. It teaches us discipline. And so I think for a lot of us, it reminds me, there was a thing a couple years ago where they did this, it was like a challenge for parents to do with their kids, and it was all about delayed gratification. It was like this promise, hey, I'm going to set this bowl of candy in front of you or a piece of candy, and if you wait until I get back, I'm going to go in here, I'll give you more or whatever. And it was hilarious, right? It's funny because you have these cute little kids who have no impulse control, right? They're just grabbing the candy immediately after their parent walks out of the room. We even did it with V. We did it with a bag of like honey barbecue Fritos. And it turned out to be like one of the funniest videos, just what he was doing and what he was saying to himself. But I think about something like that. We have a hard time with that in the sense that we can have gratification now or something far better later. And so often we will take the gratification now every time over the greater gratification or whatever it might be in the long term. But I just think part of it is impulse control and that we haven't trained ourselves to delay gratification.
Even with that, the desire for immediate gratification. So you said we could have something good now, something better later, but I think also we can have something that we consider good now, not caring about the destruction later.
Sure.
Right. So like, I absolutely agree with what you're saying. It is that the necessary part of it is taking a step back and thinking about it. What is the good now? Like, what's the best case if I make this decision right now, but what's the worst case?
Right.
And I think that's what we oftentimes don't want to do because we do want to think of ourselves as the exception, but also thinking about the worst case means denying something that we want now. I said this 2 weeks ago when I was talking about my wife. My wife has never made an emotional purchase. And when I say that, it probably sounds like I'm exaggerating, but I think you guys who know her know how true this is. She really is so practical in her life that it's infuriating to me. Like, it's so frustrating because she just doesn't have that same impulse, the drive where I do. Where in my mind I think, yeah, I know this doesn't make sense, but I just want it. I want to have that feeling right now. And she's like this voice of logic, which at times can be super annoying. And isn't the voice of logic annoying?
I almost wonder too, is there a part of us, it's almost about the guarantee, right? Like, if I eat this thing or if I do this thing, there is some guarantee that I'm gonna feel good. I'm gonna feel gratification. So I almost wonder if there's a part of it where it's like doubting the long-term goal. Like, if I delay, if I don't do this thing, is it really gonna be better for me? Like, I wonder if we struggle to believe that the end results are worth it, or if it's actually gonna end up where we want it to be. And so we choose to take the so-called safe option, even though we know it's not safe a lot of the times and what it becomes. But it's almost like I can guarantee this for sure if I do this thing, if I grab this thing. I don't know about the future though. If I delay, if I deny myself, if I withhold these things from my life, I don't know for sure how it's going to end up in the long term.
Yeah, and I think if you think about it in terms of your relationship with God, if there's doubt that's going to come in anywhere in that relationship, a lot of times it's going to stem around, this is what I desire and I feel like is best for me, but I don't know if God feels the same way. So if I don't get it now, like I'm not sure that he's going to come through for me.
Yeah.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
so like,
Absolutely.
so there's that question mark of like, man, am I going to be without? Is God going to make me be without? So maybe I better take this now.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things we talked about on Sunday, we were using the story of King David and his adultery with Bathsheba. One of the points that I made is I think from the context of the story and how it's written, it's giving you a little bit of insight that there had something else was going on in David's life that had led him to that point. I mean, just from how it words it, in this time of the year when kings go out to war, David stayed home. Like that's not an accident that it's worded that way of saying like he was neglecting his duties and what he was supposed to do.
Sure.
And like to me, that even was a symptom of something deeper. I made the assumption. I'm like, this is just my opinion. My assumption is it was the effects of having absolute power. You know, the famous saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely. But just being in a position where someone just tells you you're great all the time, everyone, you know, is working to make you happy, you start to buy into that hype. But there's like all these warning signs that led David to be basically to make a decision from a place where his character was broken, but it was probably a slow fade to get to that moment. The reason why I say that is even in our own lives, what do you guys think are some warning signs? The average person that's listening that thinks, you know, it's possible I could be right now on a pathway to destruction and not even know it. I mean, I know from my life, that's an ongoing fear of like, are there hidden areas and bad decisions? Are there warning signs that you guys could point to say, these are some markers in your life that if you start to experience these things or sense these things, this is God trying to get your attention?
I would say to start, you know, even to use the illustration of King David, when you start to go onto autopilot, almost like an apathetic posture towards whether it be marriage, your relationship with the Lord, that is a sure sign that you're never going to continue to progress. Like the reality is you're always going to move in one direction or the other. And I think for a lot of us, we buy into this idea that to put it, you know, in one terms, like God's grace for yesterday is enough for today, in the sense that we rely on that. We rely on things from the past. And so, you know, for a long time I did devotions and I was, you know, being intentional in my marriage. And so we're in a great place and I'm in a great place spiritually. Therefore, I can let off the gas, so to speak. And I think that's just really dangerous. I think actually that's probably what happened with King David. Right. I think you think about his track record, right? God had given so much favor, so much victory because his heart was right, because he was doing the right things. And I imagine that he got to a place where, man, everything is like a well-oiled machine. I have other generals and people that I can send out. And he took his foot off the gas. And I think even a scripture, I think it's 1 Corinthians 10:12, before the famous 13, no temptation has overtaken you. But Paul says, if anyone thinks he stands, take heed lest he fall. And it's this warning of like, if you think you're in a great place, if you think that temptation is beyond you, get ready, because that's the place where you're in the most vulnerable position. And so I think there's almost this self-awareness that needs to happen where we realize, man, I'm not being as intentional as I once was because things are going well. So I would say that's actually an indicator, and that sounds almost counterintuitive, but when things are going so well that you no longer are being intentional, you're no longer being sober-minded and vigilant and aware of what you're doing and how much effort you are or aren't putting into the things that should matter to you and are ultimately going to dictate the trajectory of your future.
That's really good. I mean, I really think that's profound what you just said, because as you were just talking, I was just going through hypotheticals in my mind, and every single one of them fit. Because I was like, okay, marriage, yeah, that's absolutely true. In marriage, you don't put the effort in, marriage gets worse. I was like, finances, health, spirituality, like literally every area that you quit being intentional about, you are going to naturally, then that's a dangerous place that you're going to digress instead of progress and all those.
I was going to say that's when I find myself in that place. Like if I'm doing well and I've had a great season where I feel like I'm connecting with God and I feel like things are going super well just in life in general, and I know that it's been the fruit of a regular and consistent time in my devotions, and then I get to that good place and things are going well, and I start to go, okay, I wake up and I feel like, okay, I just need to get into my day, I need to get going, and I skip one day, and maybe no consequences for that one day, but as I keep going on, if that feeling keeps residing that things are going well, that I can handle it myself, then I get to the place where I'm like, oh, I'm back in a dry season again. So I've recognized that in my life, that place where, like, when I get to the good place, for lack of better terms, that's when it's most dangerous for me, because I do let off the gas, like you just said. So
Yeah,
that's just an illustration
No, absolutely. And I think this is really like you look at like the book of Judges in the Old Testament, really the whole story of Israel. This is what you see, right? You see this pattern of they're in a good place. Somewhere along the lines, they get apathetic. There's this slow fade where there's a bad king that starts to bring things in, and their level of tolerance actually, goes up in the sense they allow more and more things to kind of creep in. They get to a place where God allows judgment to happen, where a nation plunders them, and it's this cyclical pattern where then they call out to God. They realize the error of their ways because they're reaping the consequences, the negative consequences of that, and they realize, wow, we got way off track. But it always comes from that place of where they were in prosperity, where God was walking with them, where they were being obedient, and then there's that slow fade, and it becomes a snowball effect, and you find yourself in a place where you say, how did I get here? You got there one step at a time.
Yeah. I have a pastor friend that he's now retired from pastoring. He still has a ministry, but he pastored a very large church in Phoenix. And he was talking to a group of pastors, and he goes, you guys just need to know your biggest place of vulnerability is after a large success, not a large failure.
Yep.
He said, so like if you guys build a building or you're working towards something big or you launch a new campus or something and you're all this energy toward it, he goes, it's in the season right after that you're most vulnerable. And he would give a bunch of reasons, but I think it is even one of those is when you have a goal that you're focused on, it does help you stay really disciplined and alert to it. Once you've attained that and there isn't that goal, you do lose some discipline. Like not to throw any of us like under the bus, but like I think you'd be one to even admit you like to do races and challenges. When you set a challenge for yourself athletically, you're better athletically, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like I'm just saying personally, I'm not trying to throw you under the bus.
No, that's okay.
I just know that's your personality. You like to just keep setting, I'm going to run a 30-mile challenge. I'm going to do a 20-mile. I'm going to do a marathon because of the benefit it adds to you.
Well, I was just going to say, the days that if I don't have a goal in front of me, if I'm not training for a race, those days that it's 30 degrees and it's raining outside and I have a 4-mile run on the books, like that's really easy to go. I don't need to do that today.
Right.
But if the goal's in front of me and I know I'm going to have to pay the piper in 2 months, like I've got to do 17, 18, 20 miles, whatever it's going to be, and I've not put in the time and the effort to get there, it's going to be a bad day for me. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So like, goals keep us focused, but even to continue on with what you were saying, achieving that goal and getting to the place where that relax point after the goal is the place where it's like you find yourself 3 months later eating donuts every day and not doing anything.
Chris,
you know what I mean?
Conviction about donuts or something.
Yeah, you keep bringing up donuts, man.
I had one once this week, and I must confess it now. So
I did
It's been eating away at you the whole week.
it's been eating me all week long. So.
Yeah. How about you? What do goals? What's the value of goals in your life?
This is a funny one, but so like I'm a person. Molly will joke about this, and other people that have gotten to know me. Like I'm very like I care about appearances from like a room standpoint, the way things look. I like things to be organized. Like I struggle even at home with 3 little kids when things are a mess. Like it legitimately gives me low level anxiety, and then I get really frustrated, and it's like I'm like just trying to. It's like crisis management. So one of the things, like if we have people over at our house or if we have something planned, I always joke, I love when we put something on the schedule because then it gives me, it's like I can clean the whole house. And even with, you guys know, I've been doing a lot of projects at home. We bought a house that needs a lot of work. And so slowly been chipping away at that. And so even when we're scheduling someone to come over to the house, I'll like set a goal, like, hey, I want to get this one small project done before so-and-so comes over. And so it really does help me. It gives me the motivation to say, I have a goal. I'm looking forward to the future. And it gives me a sense of urgency. But it is true in the normal mundane of life where kids are crazy and it feels like everything's chaos. It can be very easy to fall into apathy and feel like, well, there's no point in being intentional in this. But the moment you have a goal, the moment you're thinking forward to the future, it does give you some sort of motivation, something to aim towards. So I would say absolutely that applies to really most aspects of life.
All right, so let's get specific in case someone's listening. They go, okay, what are some goals that I could set that could help me? I'll share a couple, then you guys, while I'm talking, you can think of some. I have 2. I have a health goal that is a consistent marker that I aim for, and then I have a spiritual one. So the health one is I like to use my birthday as always like a reset point every year. So especially the big birthdays. So when I turned 40, I wanted to be in the best shape that I had ever been in, and I was. When I turned 40, I was in the best shape. So I turned 45 this year, and again, it's my marker that I want to be in the best shape that I ever have been. I'm fairly confident I'm going to get there. But I've been working on some different things. I have to have surgery on my wrist. That's one thing that's going to hinder that a tad bit because it's in a couple months. But it just, again, it's that constant thought that I have. Like you said, I'm going to pay the piper at some point.
Yeah.
I want to, on my 45th birthday, to be able to reflect and go, man, I'm healthy. The second one spiritually is it's a simple app. It's YouVersion app that tells you if you miss a day in your devotions. And I hate that. I hate that. It's like the other day, actually yesterday, it said I missed a day. And I was like, what? I haven't missed a day. Like it was however long ago. I had to scroll back. It was October 31st. And all it was I didn't click one of the things that I did actually read.
Did it give it a day to you when you went back and clicked it?
Yeah, well, yeah, it was one chapter that I just didn't click in Deuteronomy, and I was so annoyed by that. Actually, it was in Exodus, but I was so annoyed by it because I was like, no, I did hit all my days. But anyways, simple things like that do help me because it helps me stay consistent. Of like, I want to click that app. I want to make sure I'm doing devotions every day in a row. My health things. So, you guys have anything?
Can I ask you a question real quick?
Yeah.
So I think some people get into this mindset of like, oh, I'm just creating a checklist. Is it just checking things off the list? How have you kept it from being that? Because I know it's not that for you. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So like, how do you keep when it's goal oriented? How do you keep it from being just the checklist?
Yeah. Well, let me say this. If your problem is you're doing it and it becomes checklist, that's still a good problem to have. That's better than not having it.
Right.
If I'm being honest, because I do people will say stuff like that of like, well, doesn't it just become mundane? And I'd go, well, I'd rather have that consistency.
Sure.
But for me, how it doesn't is I just, as best I'm able, I try to engage it. So I've been in this season. This is unique for me. As I say this sounds like I'm trying to be super spiritual. I'm not. When in past years, when I do my devotions, one of the challenges is I have a hard time just enjoying and reading the Word of God versus studying it. So if I read a passage, I immediately want to take notes on it. I want to go to a commentary. And it just slowed the process down. And I just, in this season, wanted to go through the Bible and read it without any notes. And I was having the impossible time doing it. I actually thought about switching over to the Message of just reading it. That's a little bit more conversational and stuff. Where my solution was, I discovered I could listen to it. The app plays it for me. A guy speaking it out. And I love it because I'm just taking it through. And I created a rhythm so I listen to it. And when I get done, I ask myself a couple of questions. What truth in that applies to where I'm at right now? And so I just take time to process through it. So for me, not to be too dramatic, but when I'm reading and hearing about a leader or a king or something, I do view it through leadership. What principle did that leader just model that's good for me to model? What was a negative that they did? And so I just try to make it personal, and then I pray on that truth every single day. So it's, God, help me today to, whether it's to implement that or to avoid that. Yeah. And so I just try to make it personal. So I try to keep it simple that way so that I can really enjoy it. And it doesn't just simply become a checklist. Because if I did just read quickly, blah, 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 it can become that, but I'm listening and engaging it.
That's awesome. Sorry, I didn't mean to hijack
the
conversation.
Great.
Yeah. So for me, number one, I would say Me Healthy, We Healthy has helped. So for those who are listening who don't know, we have a chart. I think it's on a Google Doc, whatever, that logs, spiritual, physical, intellectual, relational, all those components. So for me, just having that visual and even daily and weekly logging those things keeps me accountable, right? So I think there's
just to be clear, when he says we, he's talking about our staff. We have this as a staff.
Thank
so
you
some
for
people might be
clarifying.
like in the church thinking like,
what am I missing out on?
Where's that at? How do I get on that?
It's our staff.
Yeah, but having something to look at and even to see, are there gaps, right? Is there a rhythm? Am I marking down that I'm working out 3 times a week? And have I been reading devotionally through Scripture? All those things. So I think having something in front of you that gives you accountability, for me, is really important. Another one that I would say, and this is more of a loose goal, so this is not something like I've written down, I'm like, was planning for into the new year, but it's kind of the idea of no idle time wasted. And so for me, whether it be driving, whatever it is, even taking a shower, I will be listening to audiobooks and podcasts, and usually that fall into the realm of Christianity or theology or something that's practically oriented towards how can I grow as a Christ follower. And so for me, that's been massively helpful because of the season of life that I'm in with little kids at home. The concept of solitude and like getting space to yourself it really is not realistic. It's super difficult. And I've said like, I crave that so bad. Like there's times like, man, I would love to just go to a monastery for a month and just like, you know what I mean? Like get some quiet. I love my kids, but you know how that is. So for me, like that idea of those quiet moments when I'm driving in the car, when I'm in the shower, I'm trying to use that to edify myself in ways that for me like are intellectually and spiritually stimulating, that I naturally long towards but do not have the space to do. So that's just been like a simple one. It's been really helpful for me to be able to listen to, because again, I enjoy reading, but having a quiet space where I can actually open up a book in our house is really, really difficult to do right now in this season. So listening to audiobooks and podcasts has been really helpful for me.
It's funny. I don't have little kids anymore in the sense my youngest is in 6th grade. But the other day I was driving over an hour. I had to go to an appointment, and it was just dead silent. I didn't have a single thing on, and it was just something really refreshing of like zero thought. I zoned out. It was like one of those drives where you get there and you don't remember driving.
Yep.
And I was just dead quiet the entire time. On the way back, I listened to a podcast. But on the way there, I was like, I just need quiet.
Just checked out.
Yeah.
I think for me, I mean, I'm a goal person. Like I like, you already mentioned it, I like having goals. One thing that I've recognized this year that I really want to grow in is just taking time to take that quiet time and connect with God. Even in my devotional time, I had found I was doing really, really well at reading and doing the intake version of it, if that makes sense. So like I was reading scripture, reading a book, studying, those types of things. And I'm really good and engaged in that portion of it. I found a hard time sitting still to spend time just connecting with God and praying and hearing from God. And so like I want to grow in that. So that's something that I'm trying to be more purposed in this year, is not just doing scripture reading through my devotions, but setting aside specific time to go, okay, God, like what are you speaking to me today? What do you, almost the questions that you ask for out of the scripture, but making sure I get the both and in that. And I pray throughout the day. So like, it's not that I wasn't praying or anything, but like I want to cherish that time, and I want that time to be something beautiful and special. So, so that's what I'm trying to work on with that. I also have this desire to understand the biblical languages. I want to be able to read them. I want to be able to speak them. I want them to be fluent, and I want to be able to operate out of that understanding. And so, I have an app that's very similar to like what Duolingo is, and just working through those things. Every single day, I try to hit that app and spend a little bit of time on it, just small chunks at a time, trying to work to build that up. So,
is it called Google Translate?
Yeah.
No, I love that. Okay, so one of the things I think from the conversations both of you guys have said, or from the things you've said, there's obviously an element of self-reflection. What part does self-reflection play into proper decision making? Because I'm going to make a negative statement here, but I think probably the average person who's making bad decisions is not consistently pausing for self-reflection, or doesn't even have a healthy, accurate system in place. Maybe they're not self-aware. Maybe they've created that bubble around them, the echo chamber, and so they don't have a system in place to give them proper feedback. But what advice would you give, or just speak to your own personal lives? What part does self-reflection play in making healthy decisions in your life and ministries?
Yeah, first I would say, and I only know this because, we're developing the leadership pipeline stuff, and one of the things that I had to work on was the self-awareness component. And I would say, like, in the last 5 to 7 years of my life, the concept of self-awareness has probably been one of the biggest concepts that I've championed, and because I've realized it's connected to so many things. Yeah. If you're a person that is not self-aware, you can make a train wreck of your life, every facet of your life. If you're just not aware of what you're doing, or even maybe you are aware of what you're doing, but you're not aware of what's driving your behaviors, it just can be catastrophic in so many different ways. One of the things that I learned in that, I believe it's like 80 to 90, I think it's around 80 or so % of people would actually say that they're self-aware, but they've done statistics where it's more of like 10 to 15% could actually be classified as being self-aware people. So that's probably not a shock to us, in the sense that...
Yeah, you ever heard that person that say like, oh, I'm just so self-aware, and you're thinking, you're the least self-aware person I've ever met in
It's
my
usually
life.
how it goes, right? Yeah, right? It's like saying if you're, I'm a super humble person. You're probably not that humble.
Yeah.
But so I think there's that part of that where people think that they are self-aware, and in reality, they have a ton of blind spots. And so I think that's one of the reasons why people don't have systems in place, and they're not even open to having those real, raw conversations with a person that might be able to hold them accountable, because they've already convinced themselves in their mind that they're self-aware. Yeah. So I think that's the first step, is almost just assume maybe you're not as self-aware
I agree.
as you think
I
that
agree
you
with that
are,
statement,
right?
Yes.
and realize that all of us, even the best of us, have certain elements of blind spots. Even if we're aware of tendencies, we might not be aware of the weight of those tendencies or how they profoundly affect people. And obviously, we see this show up in marriage more than anywhere because it's the most intimate relationship. For people who are married, we know what that looks like. But I think there has to be a rawness and a vulnerability where we're asking curious questions to the people that are closest to us, to the people that love us, to the people that we trust, to say, hey, what are some of the things you see in me? Like, I sincerely want to know. And I think you have to prepare yourself for the sting that's going to come.
Yes.
If you are not prepared,
especially in marriage.
If you're not prepared, because what can happen is immediately you ask someone that question. If you get on the defensive, they're never going to tell you again, because now you've distinguished yourself as a person who's not safe to have that kind of conversation with. So it does take a genuine, like a sincere amount of humility to be able to say, hey, look, I'd like to think that I'm really strong in these areas, but I want to know the truth. I want to know because I want to grow. I want to develop as a person. And as a Christian, like, I want to honor God. So if I'm not doing these things well, if I'm hurting you in any way, if there's things that have made you feel unheard or whatever that is, I want to know about it because I want to be able to grow. So I think that's a big one is being able to start there and say, maybe I'm not as self-aware as I'd like to think that I am, and I need to I need to have a posture of curiosity and humility and ask people some questions so that I can maybe even start to tug at some of those strings. And then that might lead you further along that path.
Yeah, I would agree 100% with what you said. I mean, 100%. That's one of the things that I've had to learn, because I would have said I would have been arrogant and think I'm really self-aware, because I think I was probably better than some of the people around me until I started asking tough questions and start to realize, man, not only am I not self-aware, I'm really poorly aware of things. And I think my marriage was one of them, where Mary and I would both agree. I mean, even to this day, even last week, having conversations where there are times we both think we're crushing it. We're like, we are really, like, for us, the tension that I've acknowledged often is that we both, our love languages are just different. And so I will think I'm 100% doing her expectations, and she feels the same way. And we'll have conversations. And this is the part that I hate, is when one of us says, you're failing, and the other one's like, well, you're failing too. And you're like, wait, what? I'm failing too? So, like, if I'm on my high horse where I'm going, Mary, you're not meeting my expectations. And she goes, well, you're not meeting mine either. And I'm like, what? You know, because in my mind I thought, wait, no.
I mean, I've been a great husband.
I'm here. This is my turn.
Yeah, right, exactly. Like, we'll address your issues later. But it is, that mindset, I would say, has been, and this does feel like I'm about to say how humble I am, but the mindset of where I just have embraced, not only could I be wrong, there's most likely I'm missing things, has been a game changer for me to grow as a husband, but also as a leader. I have found if I can take a posture that says, I bet I'm missing things, I bet I'm not coming across the way that I want, I will ask questions and get better answers from it. But also, when you ask a question, you can tell when someone is trying to figure out a way to word it to you, and that should be a clue. You know what I'm saying? Where you're like, like
there's some hesitancy.
Yeah. So I have key staff members that are that way for me. You've been that for a long time for me. Brandon and Molly are too, and obviously my wife, but where I'll ask them a question like, what that meeting I was just in, and I said that. Like, everyone's energy felt weird. Why is that? And they're like, well, and I could tell it's like, oh, okay, it's me. It's me, and you're just trying to find a nice way to word it, you know, and I try to like coax it out. Coax it? I don't know. Yeah,
that's right.
And so anyway, all that said is, but just having that posture to say, like, I want to ask tough questions, and I have to prepare my heart, because I will say this: when I ask Mary questions and she tells me, it stings 100% of the time. I wish I could just be, I don't know, whatever it is, tough enough that I just go, you know, or humble enough where I'm like, thank you for correcting me, but it still stings, but yet the payoff is worth it.
Yeah, and I think having a system in place creates that safety. So, like, what you're talking about is being able to function within that sting and not shut down the conversation that you have. I think having and I forget who I was telling this to. One of my kids, I was telling him like you guys need space to be able to process things separately, and knowing that that's the accepted system for you guys. You know what I mean? So, like, for this relationship. And I think so many people just come into it and emotions get going on both sides of it, and that, like, that's the end of it. And then one person's hurt because you want to disengage, or, you know what I mean? So, like, having those pre-conversations kind of sets the board for being able to be in that place. But again, I think that comes back to what you guys have already said. You almost have to be a little bit self-aware to to even do that, to begin that planning portion of it. So it really does start with just taking that humble posture and going, you know what, I know there are things in my life that I'll always need to be working on. So let's just walk at, like, what are the things that you see? What are the things that you see? Like,
well, and the way that I see it is it's one of those things. I remember I taught a message one time, and it was just talking about how conflict, a lot of times in our society, culture a conflict is viewed as solely negative, when in reality, conflict can also be an invitation towards intimacy. And so I would say this concept of, number one, just be careful, because I think you could have kind of see this with rose-colored glasses in the sense of like, well, I'm going to go talk to my spouse now, and it just blows up in your face, because if you don't have the right posture, and like this could potentially be a landmine that you're stepping on. Yeah. So I think there needs to be some caution when you're having these types of conversations, because there are going to be some things that sting. Yeah. There are going to be some things that you probably don't agree with. But the point of it is to learn, not to argue, not to defend yourself. But here's what I would say. If you can do that in the right way, you can actually, not only is it an opportunity for you to learn more clearly about who you are and how you operate, it's actually a way to build relational rapport and relational intimacy with your spouse, with your children, with your employees. If you're willing to have that type of posture, I mean, the possibilities are endless, in the sense that, man, you can grow in such a healthy, strong relationship if you model that for people, and they realize, wow, this person cares enough to model themselves in a posture of humility, because they want to know areas that they can grow in, so that they can be a better husband or wife or dad or mom or employer or boss, whatever that is. So to me, it's a twofold win, in that you learn about yourself in a way that is not biased, right? Where you're kind of looking at yourself with your blind spots, but it also is an invitation to grow in intimacy in those relationships.
Yeah. Okay, so we're talking about making good long-term decisions. We've stressed the importance of setting goals, the importance of really critiquing the process and getting feedback, becoming self-aware. Here's a dynamic that happens where you might have a goal, but then all of a sudden there's multiple goals that you have in life. There's multiple options. There are seasons where things arise that now take your attention onto, because you just get captivated by the urgent, like whether it's there's something negative that's happening in health or finances or whatever it might be. What's an effective way for someone to go through and prioritize their goals in season, to prioritize decision-making? Because, you could say to someone like, okay, you have a budget for your finances, but then if disaster happens in 3 areas and now you're trying to prioritize it, same thing relationally, you can have all these goals. I want to have a healthy marriage, but now all of a sudden something happens where we can't spend as much quality time together. Like how someone's like, man, I want to keep making good decisions, but how do I prioritize goals? Is there a way that you guys could give them some coaching in that?
You just need to keep in mind, well, I'll say it this way: see God first and let Him help you process through those decisions. First of all, I'm a believer, so I'm pursuing a healthy relationship with God myself. I'm also a husband and a father, so I'm pursuing healthy relationships in my family. I'm a pastor, and so I'm pursuing healthy relationships in the spiritual health here. Right. And then I'm also a grad school student, so I have a lot of and then add on top of that, I'm a runner, and so like all of these really highly wonderful things that I love and are such a big part of my life, they at times can pull apart there. So like I've had, particularly this last season, I've gone, okay, God, what are the things that I really need to focus on? They all deserve my time and attention. They all are great things, but what is the key thing, and where are the areas where I might have to slip this to focus on this? Yeah. And so letting God kind of shape your life and your heart in that, but then also diminishing all the peripherals. You said earlier, like no idle time. I think we have far more free time in our lives than we give ourselves, than we're willing to acknowledge. And so being able to push if these are the 6 things that are important to me, have I first cleared off all of the other things so that I have time to do the 6 things? And then from there, I'm going to prioritize what comes first and then what comes second, and so forth and so on.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. Like I would 100% agree with that. I think you start with, if as a follower of Jesus, what does it look like for me every day to live a life that's honoring to God? That's number one. everything else below that, if it gets in the way of that, then that thing has to go. That thing has to change. So I think you prioritize, right, the totem pole there. So like that's number one. If second is your marriage, right? If you're married, I think all of us would agree that's number two, right? Like you're the way that you love and serve your spouse. And so if there was something that would happen though that would compromise your devotion to the Lord, then I think that's where something needs to change, right? So I think you start with that.
And it's not jettison your spouse. So just
no. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. But in the sense of
We tried.
well, because
You are distracting me from the Lord.
because even that though, right, falls into the category number one, right?
Yeah, right.
To honor and to glorify God, to be obedient to Him. So anything that
We're
takes
going to
away
take
from
that sound clip of his out of
Oh
context.
man, this is going to be great. But I won't go on with that because I think you said it really well. I think you have to prioritize what are the most important things that God has called me to do, and as you go down that list, as something on the lower end threatens something on the higher end, then something needs to change there, or something needs to be sacrificed.
So it's
there.
always in order.
Yeah.
A lesser can't trump a higher priority on
Yeah,
that, right?
and I have actually a perfect example of this. Last night we had friends of ours that reached out to us, Makar and I. They wanted some wise counsel on a decision they've been tossing around, and they've been looking to upgrade their house. And the house that came onto the market was out of their budget. And so they asked, we've prayed about this. This came on the market. We don't know if this is of God. So I would say, number one, they did two things right. They prayed about it first. They've been praying about it. Number two, they reached out, asked for wise counsel. So they wanted people, like-minded Christians who were going to give them a spiritual response to that. So they did two things really, really well. But our response to them was, in this particular situation, it might appear that, God is opening this door, and sometimes that can be hard to navigate. We've all been in those places. But I said, if making an offer on this house, if you were to get this house for what they're asking, if that's going to put you in financial hardship, if that's going to add stress to your life, if that's going to bring a dynamic to your family, it's going to put stress in your marriage and with parenting your children, all of that stuff, then that is not something God wants for you. And so it fits into that same category though, right? Because you have to say, my relationship with God is here, my relationship with my spouse and loving my children and all that. If this decision is going to somehow in the future potentially draw problems or bring problems into those other relational dynamics, then this is not a decision that I should make. And so it was a short conversation, but it was a great conversation. And I think that is one of the ways that we have to look at all of the decisions of our life. Is this something, even though it might look good, it might even look feasible, is it something, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we're going to say, man, this caused a lot of problems. This led to a lot of stress, and it made it so that I was not able to prioritize or do the most important things well.
When I was, I'm sorry.
No?
I was just going to say, I also think we need to be aware that if we're not pursuing God in making those decisions, we'll fall into this place where we think balance is the key to making these healthy decisions. And I don't know that it's balance, because there is so much of things look differently in different seasons of life. There will be times, like Anthony, you got young kids. My kids are getting they're on the later side of things where they're going to start moving out, and
Lord willing.
Hopefully, Lord willing. but so like this season looks different than your season of what it means to parent. You know what I mean?
For sure.
I'm still parenting. It's still a priority in my life, but it takes up a different time and attention than like the season that you're in. So being able to recognize that and know that and be comfortable in, like, if you're in relationships with your marriage, like, you can't neglect your marriage all the time, but there might be seasons where date night might be, you're going to touch base for an hour before bed. You know what I mean? Every night.
Looks
and
different.
then, so it's not going out you know what I'm saying? So, but just making sure that it's not a compromise on the priority of those things, but also being able to shift and wiggle things as different seasons demand.
Yeah.
So,
All right, real quick, you kind of already said it, but I want you to say it again. And same for you. If you were to rank in order your top 5 priorities of life, what are the top 5 in order? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
my relationship with God is number 1. My relationship with Cassie is number 2. Kids is number 3, and then from there, I mean, it's all my extended family, pastoral, like all my friendship relationships. So the relationships that I have through here, through my extended family at home, like caring for them. I want that. I want those 5 things to be the priorities of my life. Was that 5?
That was 4, I thought.
Oh,
You got
That last one is a big bucket of people.
Yeah.
And I'm there with you on that.
you had God, Cassie, kids, all the relationships.
okay. And then I would say the last one is,
Running.
no, I'd say it more so it's the scholarly work that I
Okay.
do. Like that is a priority to me, to be
Yeah.
engaged in studying the Word of God and understanding the theological concepts that are the root of our faith. And so,
Okay. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the same thing. I would say, yeah, number one is my relationship with Jesus. Number two, my relationship with Micaiah, my wife. Number three, my kids. Number four is going to be, and that's where I said it's kind of a bucket there: friends, extended family, pastoral care of the people that God has entrusted to me and will entrust to me in the future. So I think I would say my difficulty in articulating this is the problem is that a lot of times, and this maybe is a good conversation to have, but a lot of these things run concurrently, like in your life, right? They're all at the same time. And so even the concept of like staying physically healthy or being wise with your finances, it's not like those are like, that's number 7 and number 8. It's a lot of
they
times.
integrate into
Yes, they
yeah.
integrate
Right. Yeah,
into
for
what
sure.
it means to be healthy with my so finances are going to drastically impact my marriage and my family. And so to me, all of those kind of bleed into each other and overlap.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, even as we list these out, it seems like most of them are relational, right? The way that we relate to people, the way that we relate to the world is going to orient all those other things. And so it makes me think of even just Paul talking about how like love covers a multitude of sins, right? If we orient that correctly with our relationship with God, with our relationship with our spouse and our children and the people that God has entrusted to us, I think a lot of those things are gonna fall into place when we're doing right by them.
For sure. But I think what you said is great. When you love God and you love your wife, you're going to honor both in your finances. You know, like, so even for me, like my wife having a budget makes her heart at ease. And so like to love her well is to have a budget and honor a budget.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember this, when they put me as lead pastor and I did my acceptance speech is what I was about to say. I don't know what the proper
The
thing was.
ordination?
Acceptance speech,
Yeah.
I love
But
it.
when I just shared with them, I told the church, I said, I just want you guys to know, like, as you give me this position, God is first, Mary's second, my kids are third. And I said, like, and my other relationships, but don't worry, you guys are a close fifth. Like I said to the church, like, and you know, I know it was like a weird thing to say, but I wanted them to know
yeah.
that the way for me to be the best pastor possible, you guys have to be in fifth place. Because I have to love God first. I have to love Mary. I have to love my kids. I have to love the other relationships in my life, like what I would consider friends and staff. And then the ministry, my calling does matter to me. Like I love the church. Like it's a huge priority in my life, but its health flows from the other things being in proper order.
Absolutely.
If I put ministry ahead of other things, ministry would actually suffer. That's the weird part about it is making it more of a priority in the wrong order would create dysfunction in it. If I put it above even God, and that can happen in ministry, then it doesn't have the blessing because I'm not filled spiritually. I'm in a dry place. And so I've had to learn in that order. So like even things of, I don't do evening meetings very, very rarely. Because for a long time, I had young kids. I was in your season and now I have more flexibility because my kids are older, they're in sports, and I can schedule a meeting and not miss home time and stuff. But for a long time, I was like, I just simply don't do it, which is very abnormal for a pastor, specifically a pastor of a church of our size. But I was like, in this season of life, it's marrying kids. And so like all of those things I have discovered that when I keep putting the energy to keep them in proper order, life is better and I make better decisions.
And you're modeling that for the church. That's the other part of it, right? So like the church being fifth place, you're actually modeling to them what should be imitated in their own lives, in the sense that, nobody's job. And we live in an era where like career-driven people are very prevalent. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It can be a bad thing, but it's one of those lessons where you're teaching people. Someone owns their own business and it's thriving and they're doing well. They're making millions of dollars. You're imitating to them, hey, that should never come in the place of your relationship with the Lord or your wife or your kids or the people that God has entrusted you to love and serve. So I think that's at the end of the day, it might seem counterintuitive to say that to a church, but you're actually modeling what I think Scripture clearly teaches as far as the order or the, your sphere of influence and what you've been entrusted to. These are the order of things. And if you get those things out of order, that's a lot of times where the trouble will come in.
Yeah, because I think we've seen in our cultures, I think a prevalent one is job above things that shouldn't be.
Absolutely.
But I also think in our culture now it's kids above things that shouldn't be.
Kids in sports.
Yeah, kids in sports, like kids above marriage. There's a lot of marriages that they would say, man, we just don't have time for each other because we're running our kids all these different directions. And I always give the same advice to that. I'm like, then tell your kids no. Like in the sense of, I know one family that said they tell their kids, you get one activity a year. And it works for them. And I go, great, that's wisdom.
Yeah.
That's loving your kids.
Yep.
Mary and I have made date night a priority for a long time. And whenever my kids would ask me when they were younger, like, how come you guys are going out? Because they'd be kind of bummed. Like, why aren't we doing a family night? And I would say, because mom's a priority. And I would, jokingly say to them, I love mom more than you guys. And like they look at me, I go, I love you a lot, but you guys are leaving someday. She's not. And so now my kids, as they're older, they'll say that to me every once in a while as a joke. Like we were going on a date night and they'll go, yeah, because you love mom more than us. And I'm like, that's right. And obviously we don't actually rank love, but what I'm saying to them is she's a priority. She's more of a priority to me than you guys are. Not because I love you any less, but because I love you so much. I want them to have healthy marriages. I hope my kids go and model the same thing to their kids because I want them to know, like, Mary has always been a priority. So
I think that keeps it flexible too. So like, it's not going to look one way for every person.
Right.
It's going to take seeking God and determining in that season what's going to be what's going to need the most attention. I'll say it that way.
Sure.
And so it's being purposed. I know in my life, like this is a constant check that I am running in my mind as I go through the different seasons of life that I have. Am I still keeping these priorities in line the way that I need to? Does Cassie feel the same way? Do the kids feel the same way? Do you feel the same way as my boss? You know what I'm saying? Like, do my grades reflect that this is a priority? Like, so like doing these checks where I can stay super purposed to adjust where I need and maybe or reorient or readjust back to, okay, I've misprioritized this and I've done it wrong so many times that I'm learning to, okay, this is just a season where I have to go back and fix it and reorient it. So I think that's just part of the process. It's always something that you're checking. It's always something that you're looking at and being purposed about so that you can keep those priorities in the right order. Because you don't just set them and they don't stay there.
Right. Well, and that goes right back to what we were talking about earlier, right? So that the concept of self-awareness, it's very easy to convince ourselves, well, like I'm putting God first and but does God agree with that? Does your wife agree with that? Like you might have a certain assessment. So again, it takes that humility and reflection and even asking those questions, even like thinking with our relationship with God. God, is there anything in my life that I need to submit and yield to you that has become an idol? It's become a distraction. It's actually become a hindrance to who you want me to be and what you want me to do. To be able to pray almost sacrificially in the sense of, God, take it away, remove it. That's a scary thing to pray. And yet I believe it honors God and it makes sure that we are putting things in the proper order. Same thing with our spouses, having that conversation. Is there any area where you feel like, maybe you haven't been heard or I haven't served you well, or I've not given you the attention that you feel like you need, or with your children. Again, you're doing both of those things in that you're learning about yourself. You're exposing some of those blind spots so that you can make sure those things are in proper order, but you're also adding that relational equity with those people in your life that are most important to you, and you're letting them know that they matter by having those types of conversations.
Yeah, one of our staff values is if something's out of whack, something's out of order. And it's a play on that principle that we were just talking about. Is I grew up with that phrase. I don't know if other people did. Like, that feels out of whack. Like, it just means like something's off. It's something's not sitting right. And it's because something's out of order. There's something that's not in the proper order in your life. So I would say that if you're finding constant tension in one of those areas, if you're not feeling close to God, if you're feeling tension with a spouse, if like your kids, like there's tension with your kids, I think it is wise to take a step back and go, are my priorities out of order? What else have I allowed in there? Is it my job? Is it my own hobbies? Like, I've known people that have been so caught up in their hobbies, they make that as a priority over their families and spouses and whatever it might be. And then to reorder those things and make them priorities, I think it's critical to making healthy decisions. All right, before we go, any last thoughts, last nuggets of wisdom you want to drop to people that are just having to make decisions in their lives?
Not really. I think we covered a lot of ground, and I think there's some good practical steps with that.
The only thing I was going to say too is one of the questions that you kind of posed, but we didn't get a chance to talk about, was the idea of having decision paralysis. What happens when you have a hard time making a decision, and how do you walk forth in confidence at that? I've really, if you're the type of person that struggles with the overthinking, and you always have things going on in your head, you really have to get comfortable with the fact of you might make a wrong decision. That's okay. Yeah. But it's okay if you've done this. If you've sought God, you feel like God is leading you and it doesn't stand against the word of God, like it's okay to make a decision. If it doesn't work out, try something else.
good.
You know what I mean? And so don't be paralyzed by, because as many people that underthink their lives, there's just as
Sure,
many that
yeah.
overthink their lives. And so like living in that place where you trust God's leading
It's good.
and walk out in confidence, not in yourself, but on him, and knowing that he has you if you make a mistake. And
Right.
we do. We all make mistakes.
In light of that, I had a person after week 2, come and talk to me. They said, I had made this decision. They listed all the things. I prayed about it. I got godly counsel. But now, after hearing this message, I'm concerned, what if I made the wrong decision? And I said to him, I think our God is kind. And I think if you've gone to him and asked him his advice, asked for direction, and you got godly counsel in this, if it was something that was going to be wrong, he would have made that really clear to you. I just think God is kind.
Yeah.
And I don't think he's messing with us. And this person's like, so you think I made the right decision? I said, 100%. I would go straight forward with whatever decision you've made because you prayed and sought counsel on it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I would agree with that. It's just don't be caught up in the insecurity. Just know that God will direct you.
Yeah, anytime you seek to honor God, I just believe God is going to honor you in that.
Yeah.
Even in those areas where you might have somehow maybe misheard, or when you seek in humility to honor God and for him to direct your steps, even if you make a wrong decision somehow, some way, I think God is gracious, and I think he honors us somehow in the midst of that.
Yeah.
So all three of us, we've all had sermons that we've preached and thought, that could not have gone worse.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
without fail, doesn't someone come up to you afterwards and go like,
Yeah.
that was just the most powerful teaching I've ever heard in my life?
That's
You're
the
like, what were
best-
you listening to?
Exactly.
That's the best sermon you've ever delivered.
Yeah.
Like, really?
Bro, what does that say about the rest of my messages?
I know. But those are those moments I think God just honors.
Yeah,
Like, I think he
absolutely.
knows our hearts. We're trying our best. And
Sure.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And if this is a blessing to you, share, pass it on to friends and family, and stay connected. And we are honored that you engage this, and we hope it is a blessing to your life. So we hope to see you on a Sunday, and God bless you.